Hi guys, I want this to be a fairly quick tutorial just on the settings I use for my DSLR camera. I've got a Nikon D5300, but yours should have similar settings even if it's not the same camera. So I'm in the shooting menu at the moment in the menu system, and I just want to take you into the movie settings and briefly explain what I've set up here. So I've got the frame size and frame rate. So unless you really want to save a lot of memory space, or you're specifically shooting for a small screen, you want to really keep at full HD, which is the 1920 by 1080, and depending on what you want to do, you'll either do 24 or 25p, which is 24 or 25 frames per second, which is normal shooting, or if you want to do a bit of slow motion work, you would shoot at 50 frames per second or 50p and then slow it down. But the higher the resolution and the higher the frame rate, the more memory it uses and the less the record time. But usually on the 1920 by 1080 at 24 frames per second, I get a maximum of about 20 minutes, which is usually more than enough for doing any of my puppet videos. So the movie quality we've got set on high. Now you know either have high quality or normal. I usually have it set on high quality because I figure, well, why not? But I think I'm right in saying if you set it on normal, you will get slightly longer time, but whether it will affect the quality majorly or not, I don't know. You'd need to play around with that if that's an option for you. Personally, I never use or very rarely use the built-in microphone, and if I do, I use the actual audio built-in, but I use an external Rode camera microphone. Now the two settings on here are either auto sensitivity or manual, and in the past when I've recorded a music session with some people, I've had it on auto sensitivity, because then if they suddenly play really loudly or play really quietly, and then go really loudly again, it doesn't blow out the top of the levels and completely wipe everything out. But if you're shooting what I call normal video for puppets or whatever, I would stick with the manual sensitivity and set it to whatever works for you. But personally, I just keep it on auto just because I use an external audio recorder normally, and I only use this for syncing up the external recorder as well. And again, third option is microphone off, and if you're never ever going to use it, you could do, but like I say, it's always useful just for syncing up an external audio recorder or for working out what's going on, if nothing else. Next down, we've got wind noise reduction. I keep this on because it does help a little bit, but to be honest, if you're going to record outside, you really want to have a dead cat microphone cover on your microphone, otherwise you will have wind noises regardless. And the manual movie settings are either on or off, and I keep those on. So that's the basic settings in the menu system for movies. So now if we go into the information window, now at the moment, if you notice in the top left hand corner, the S means that this is set at the moment on shutter priority. The only other option that I would use from time to time is manual. Now the difference between manual and shutter priority is in manual priority, or in manual, the shutter speed, which is the left hand dial, and the f-stop or exposure, which is the middle dial, are both set manually. If you go into shutter priority, which is the S mode, the shutter speed is set, and then the f-stop or the aperture is changes according to what you're doing. So as we see here, I've got the shutter speed set at 1/50th of a second, and at the moment I'm pointing towards my computer, which is in quite a dark area. If I now swing my camera around so it's pointing out the window where it's brighter, you'll see the F number has gone down and the iris has got smaller. That basically means that it's restricting the amount of light coming in so that things aren't blown out, and then when I come back round again, you'll see that it's opened again. Actually, it says it's too dark, which just means it would be a very underexposed image. So what you need to do is make sure that the shutter speed under normal circumstances is set at twice whatever your frame rate is. So as I'm doing 24 frames per second, the closest for double that is 1/50th of a second shutter speed, so that's what I always set it at. Obviously if you're doing 1/50th 50 frames per second, you would set it at 1/100th. If you're doing 30 frames per second, if that's an option on your camera, you would do it at 1/60th. But whatever it is, set it at double that value. That's what they call the 180-degree rule. You can look that up if you want to know more. If you're doing aperture priority, obviously you don't need to do that. If you're doing manual, which I had it on a moment ago, which I've got it on there, you can actually change the aperture manually until you get something that works well for your settings. Now if you have it on manual mode, then if you go from a very bright area to a very dark area, you'll see underneath the aperture ring, which is the middle dial, that there's the little bar that keeps going down and up. As I'm moving that towards the light, it goes towards positive. As I go to the dark, it goes towards negative. So if you want to change in light levels, like going from light to dark or dark to light, then that's what you'd want to go with. If you wanted to keep your light levels fairly constant, say for example you're filming outside and as the sun goes in and out of the clouds you just want to keep things constant, then you can use the shutter priority. You just need to be a bit careful though, because you can get some strange looking video if the light levels change too greatly and you've got it on the shutter priority. So you just need to experiment with that and see what works well for you. But a lot of the times I shoot on manual, but occasionally shutter priority works well if manual is playing up. Over on the right hand side you've got the ISO, and that's basically the sensitivity to light. So under normal circumstances, if I'm shooting outside, I want to keep that on 100, which is the lowest setting. And then if you're shooting inside, often I'll go up to 400, 800 or maybe even 1600 on the ISO, so that I then don't have to have my aperture quite so wide or whatever. A couple of other notes just to point out briefly. On the aperture ring, the wider the aperture, the shallower the depth of field. So if you do have shutter priority and your aperture changes from wide open to closed, depending on what you're filming, you may notice a change in the depth of field, and again that can be an issue. If you want to go for the film look, then really what you want to do is open your aperture as wide as it'll go, keep it on the 1/50th of a second, and then you'll see there that as I'm pointing towards the sunlight, it's basically right above the plus, which means it's blown out. At that point you would need to have an ND filter, which is it's a bit like putting on sun cream for yourself. It's a coloured filter which basically reduces the amount of light coming into the camera. Without that you couldn't have shallow depth of field like that. What you'd have to do instead is you would have to step down your f-stop, but then that means if you're going for the film look you couldn't achieve that. So these are some ideas on some basic settings. The only other thing that you might want to look at is the white balance. I usually have it set on one of the pre-settings, either direct sunlight or cloudy, tend to work quite well for most things. You can have a pre-option on some cameras, which I have on here, which basically means that you take a picture of a white bit of card and then the camera will adjust your white balance accordingly. Oh, sorry, it's cut out there, let's come back to that. And the other option is your auto white balance if nothing else works, but with the auto white balance you may or may not get issues. Again, just have a play around with it, see what works for you, and then take it from there. But these are just some basic settings. Hopefully they'll give you an idea of what works, certainly what works for me for my normal settings, and it gives you a good starting point to play around with.